Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Springford Area School District Board meeting. Today is Monday, April 22nd. Please rise for the pledge.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Springford Board of School Directors believes the community has the right to bring before the board issues and concerns they may have about items on the agenda or about items in general which affect the district or their children. Because of this belief and philosophy, the board will schedule a time at the beginning and conclusion of every meeting to have an opportunity for community members to share their concerns with the board. At the start of the meeting, members from the public may comment on agenda items only. The school board will move through the meeting agenda, then at the end, when prompted, there will be a time for public comment. This meeting is being filmed to be broadcast on community cable channels and online. Individuals intending to make public comments should be aware that they are being filmed. Speakers will be asked to state their name and the area in which you reside before your comment.
Thank you very much and welcome everybody. Mrs. Pickard, could we please have a roll call?
Yes. In person this evening, we have Mrs. Deerdorf, Dr. Sharma, Mrs. Weingarten, Mrs. Westwood, Dr. Wright, Mr. Jackson, and Mrs. Hermans. On Zoom, we have Mrs. Goldsmith and Mr. Lackey.
Thank you very much. And as far as announcements go, the board did meet in executive session prior to the start of this meeting at 6:15 for an update on a legal matter. Mr. Rizzo, do you have anything?
Nothing at this time, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So we'll be moving on to public to be heard on agenda items only. If there's anyone in the room that wishes to speak, please approach the podium with your name and township of residence, as well as the agenda item for which you are speaking. Okay, seeing as no one is moving forward, we will go right into our presentations, and as we do every April, we will have Mr. Fink come to the podium to discuss the proposed final budget for the 2024-25 school year.
Proposed budget, Madam President.
Proposed final budget. Yes, I did say that. Did I not?
Okay, good evening. Here we are again. Tonight we're going to talk about the proposed final budget for the next school year. Some quick agenda items I think that we're going to cover here, as we do pretty much every year. We're going to go through some budgeting obstacles. I'm going to run through the changes in the current proposed final budget versus what we had in the preliminary budget back in November. We'll go over year-to-year changes in revenues and expenses, and then we'll look at, of course, the tax impact and then the next steps. So some obstacles that we have, which we always do about this year, about this time of year, is the state budget. We don't know where that's going to land. The governor, of course, had put forth his preliminary budget back in the February-March timeframe, but of course those numbers are not yet final, and probably don't expect them to be until sometime in late June, if late June. And of course, the numbers that get impacted there are a number of subsidies, as you can see listed there. Another area is in the federal spending of grants, which is a small part of our budget, but still a part of the budget just the same. Title awards haven't been communicated to us yet. So typically we would get those in the June-July timeframe. But we do make estimates based on past. So let's take a quick look at the changes that we've had since the preliminary budget back in November, which this board voted on in January. So these are some of the items I had. So the budget books coming back from the various departments and building budgets, we reduced that gap, the original gap, by about $460,000. Additionally, the rate change from the original assumptions that we had for PSERS, a drop from 34% to 33.9%, so that saved about almost $400,000. We decreased the budgetary reserve, and we didn't actually decrease the budgetary reserve. We decreased the amount we're going to increase the budgetary reserve, which is something we talked about last spring as potentially having that be a percentage of the overall budget, not just a flat number of $300,000 as it had been for a number of years. Perhaps this isn't the year to do that. but we certainly have it on our radar to do in the future. For special education, there was an increase of almost $1.6 million on top of what was budgeted in the prelim budget. And a lot of that, of course, has to do with the age increase from 21 to 22. That's pushing closer to $1 million at this point. And of course, increased number of move-ins to the district and added services that are required for some of our special ed students. We also had, and you'll see, of course, on the agenda tonight, the CBA, which was negotiated, the meet and discuss benefit plans for various groups, the admin, the secretaries, custodians, and food service groups. Those added overall about net of some other changes, about 1.4 for this year. We decreased the debt service increase. Again, is a number we wanted to move up to. Inflation is ever growing, as we know, so we know that at some juncture we will need to increase our debt service portion of our budget to cover those types of increases as we go forward. We did reduce that number. And then we also reduced our estimate for workers' compensation by about 210. And that's basically due to the good work of the safety committee headed up by Mrs. Lease. On the revenue side of the ledger, Mrs. David Heiser and I are constantly looking at our money management for our investments and such. And in doing so, we were able to increase that by about 1.3. A lot of this goes back to what happens at the Fed. If you recall, the beginning of the year, I should say the tail end of last year, they were calling for potentially 5 rate decreases this year. Now we're down to maybe 2, and the chatter I'm hearing is maybe none. So long as that doesn't happen, our rates will stay at a higher level, and of course that'll increase our earnings. A word of caution always is, this is economically driven, so that is not going to be the number going forward, into the future. So we have made provisions in our long-term plan, obviously, to compensate for that. State subsidies estimate, an increase of about $300,000. That's taking 50% of what Governor Shapiro's preliminary budget was. After looking at and speaking with a number of other CFOs, business managers in our area, I could see that some were taking none, some were taking half, and a very, very small number were taking all. And the chatter that I've gotten back is that we're going to get some of it, but we're not getting all of it. So 50% looked like a good marker. And then, of course, because our PSERS overall dollars have increased, a small reduction in monies that we had set aside that was committed for that purpose by the board in years past. So if we look at those changes, our proposed gap back in the preliminary budget was about almost $8.5 million. Then we had, of course, the revenues we just talked about, reducing that. The expense changes increased that a little bit, so we're sitting at just under $7 million as a final budget gap currently. Now I'd like to take a quick couple of minutes to talk about year over year and things that have changed. Remember that what we just talked about was just preliminary budget. Now let's look at budget to budget from year to year. So as is typically true, you can see from the slide that we are heavily funded by local sources. 78% is funded by local sources, about 21% by the state, and about 1% from the Fed, of course, where all the things are told that we have to do. So when we look at the local side, we look at real estate tax, and basically it's based on organic growth, which means increased assessments in our area, whether that's new builds or interim assessments, someone adds a swimming pool, that type of thing. But we're looking at organic growth there without doing anything of about $2.5 million. Our earned income tax and our real estate transfer taxes, as I repeatedly speak about in the Finance Committee, are overperforming, and they continue to overperform. So that's an increase of about 1.3. I spoke about earned interest, something we were able to do on the from numbers I already had baked into the model, but when I look at a year over year, it's about a $900,000 increase in interest earnings year over year in the budget. And then all the others about 400. Then for the state side, we're looking at, for the basic ed and the special ed, it's an increase to the budget year over year of about $750,000. That's some monies that we hadn't budgeted last year, plus some monies that we're looking to budget this year, kind of increasing that. Our Ready to Learn, there's no change there. I haven't seen that change in years. It's been flat for quite some time. Looking at the transportation subsidy, and it's basically due to an increased cost profile, there's actually going to be a drop there, we feel, of about $270,000 based on recent trends and some other factors that go into that. And then the PSERS and the FICA subsidy, it's really due to higher wage growth because you got to spend more to get more. That's an increase of almost $940,000. On the federal side, we'll see a decrease there because we're winding out of the COVID dollars, the COVID spend. So when we look at all that side by side, that's what it looks like. We're looking at a total of about $195.6 million in total revenue. And then other sources, the $1.5 million includes the piece of the PSERS reserve that I had mentioned earlier, plus a piece of the curriculum reserve, which I'll get into a little bit more when we talk about the expense side of things. So the number that always interests me when I look at these comparatively is I like to look at that right-hand column where it says 3.2%. So organically, our revenues are growing at about a 3.2% rate. I think we kind of know where the inflation rates are, and of course, that's impacting a lot of things on the expenditure side of the budget. So when I look at this, and again, we're talking about a lot of different things here, but we're talking about the funding for all programs for next year, including some of those agreements that I mentioned that are on the agenda for approval tonight. So typically, we're in the 67% of the total budget, 67 to 70% is personnel wages and benefits, not just the wages, but also the benefits. So when I look at the overall, what I'm looking at about is there's about a $4.7 billion increase year over year, and it's comprised of those two components. One, of course, has to do with the collective bargaining unit agreement, which is on the budget tonight, and another piece of it, of course, has to do with general increases and the agreements with those other three groups, the admin, the secretaries, and the custodial groups. Food service is actually on a different budget, so that's not included in here, which is smaller compared to everything else. The taxes and benefits side, an increase of about $2.3 million. We are expecting the PSERS cost to increase about $1.5 million, despite there being a drop in the rate. However, the overall gross wage number is increasing, and that's how you get to a higher cost there. Medical coverage, an increase of about 424,000. This is a number I will tell you we are still reviewing. As I mentioned in finance, we did get our consultants' numbers back. They were higher than we expected them to be, and therefore those are not included in the number right now, as I wanted to have a little bit more time to review that. And then payroll taxes due to the higher wages of about $360,000. So, and then for non-personnel related expenditures, a total of about $6.5 million. And I think really what's going on here is we're now starting to feel the pain of the inflation that's been around for the past number of years. If we do a collective look at, and I call it inflation stacking, the cumulative effect of inflation increases over the years. Over the past 3 years, it's been close to 17 or 18% if you add the numbers. We're seeing a very similar pattern. We're just seeing it stacked on the back end more than we did see it on the front end. One of the big drivers, of course, is the special education. Again, we talked about the age increase from the 21 to the 22, which is going to be a big factor that wasn't in this budget that we now have to pay for and prop it up for the next coming budget. So that's almost a double whammy. Then we also have, of course, as I mentioned, move-ins and services and et cetera, those types of things. Because of the larger number that we looked, myself, Dr. Giambattista, and Amy Hiller, one of our special ed supervisors, sat down and looked at the special education budget line by line, detail by detail, starting with every student that we know we have in our program, looking at their needs, from a financial perspective, and coming up from the ground floor to build up what the number was. And that's the increases that we came up with, and setting aside, of course, a smaller amount, or an amount, at least an estimated amount, for any increases that we might see coming forward. Curriculum, about $1.2 million. However, that's offset by what is in the long-term curriculum plan reserve. So while there's an increase there on the expense side, there is an equal increase on the revenue side. So that kind of cancels each other out. And then the other ones are, obviously by looking at them, they're somewhat smaller. Transportation is an indicated cost we knew we were going to have, and also with the fuel that goes along with that. So when I look at those numbers side by side, again, this is what we're looking at. So on the salaries and benefits side, so personnel costs, you're talking about overall growth there of about 5.5%, inclusive of the agreements that are on the agenda for approval this evening. When you look at everything below that that is non-personnel related, again, back to the inflation items, we're talking about an 8.6%, which is, again, back-ending the stacking of inflation over the past few years. Again, analytic number that I look for is the one all the way to the bottom right, which is 7.1%. We compare that to the 3.2% we saw on the revenue side, we can see the disconnect, right? So what does that look like overall? Overall, we're talking about revenues just under $196 million and expenses of about $204. Transferred from committed funds from PSERS, which I spoke about before, of $150, $150,000, and from the curriculum reserve about 1.3, for a total gap of 6,969, which would equate to a tax impact, at least currently. This is not the final budget. This is the final proposed. Still working on it. 5.36% versus the Act 1 index of 5.3%. So clearly, still work to do. The difference, by the way, just so everyone's clear, in that 6 basis points is about $80,000 to get us down to the index level. I call this next slide the Abby Deerdorf slide because it shows, you were going to ask, right? I know you were going to ask. It shows, well, what's the impact of all that? So 1% in real estate tax change is approximately $1.3 million. Or if you look at it, it's about $30.88 per $100,000 assessed, right? If you're looking at a 5.36 tax increase, which is over the index, so we're going to bring that down, you're looking at approximately $165 per year for a $100,000 assessment. If you have a $200,000 assessment on your home or your property, then it would be obviously double that. At the 5.3 or the index level, that is about 164. So it's not a big change, but a small change there. And then, of course, you could see what it looks like on a month-to-month basis if you were inclined to boil it down farther. So what are the next steps? Well, obviously, the first of the next steps is to adopt the proposed final, which is on the agenda tonight. You can see I wrote it's a checkbox because we have to do it kind of by law if we're going to achieve our target of approving a final budget at the end of May. We need a 30-day window from the adoption of the proposed final to the adoption of the final. There's work to be done, right? But on May 8th or earlier, we'll make the proposed final budget available for public inspection on the PDE Form 2028. That'll be on our website. We'll also have a copy at the district office if someone wants to come in and look at it. On May 14th, we have our Finance Committee meeting, at which time we will be looking to close the gap that we have and look at any other possible changes that we may have. On May 18th or earlier, we'll publish notice to intent to adopt the final budget, and target date May 28th to do the adoption of the final budget for next year, giving my department and the tax collectors time to get their paperwork done so we can get the bills out by July 1st, which we're supposed to do by law as well. And with that, I'm happy to take any comment or questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fink.
Welcome.
As Mr. Jackson was alluding, we appreciate all the work that goes into this presentation, even knowing that this is just, in many ways, a check the box to be able to get to the final vote in May. We still appreciate all the work that you and your team do to provide an update to the board with regards to where we're at. So, granular question, and I know that it was alluded to in the presentation on the expense side, but we've talked a lot about healthcare costs in Finance Committee, and you've been regularly updating us with, commentary from Ruskini with regards to what's driving some of the claims. And, this isn't just for this year, but, I remember that going back multiple years on the Finance Committee. So I'm just curious, I've seen like neighboring school districts kind of getting creative with regards to trying to manage healthcare costs, trying to control what we can control. Is that something that you and your team and the administrators have been talking about? Because this is not a problem that's going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah, we look at a number of possibilities. I speak very frequently with Mrs. Lease and Mr. Rizzo to go over potential plans for controlling stuff, whether those are, we don't really want to do anything drastic to our plans, obviously, because they're a big component of why people are here. But we do look at some other possibilities and things that we maybe have working in the works. They may not be short-term fixes, but I'm a long game player anyway. So I don't want to disclose too much without knowing enough at this time.
No, but it just gives me confidence in that you guys are thinking long game as it relates to this, because we can't just go year by year in budget. I hear you say that. I took that from you, Mr. Fink.
Yeah, that's correct.
We can't budget year to year.
Can't budget year to year. You gotta go way out.
Thank you.
You're
Any
welcome.
questions or additional comments from the board?
Hi, thank you very much for that, and echoing, yes, I know how much work goes into this for you and your staff. A question, and this may have to be answered like at the finance meeting, regarding the estimated basic education and special ed. A couple of years ago, I think it was not the budget we're under now, but the previous year, we received more from the state than was anticipated. Many schools did. There was a correction that was done. And we ended up, and this is line 7111 and 7271 of our budget, by the way. The state allocated us actually almost $1 million more than we had anticipated. Could you please explain with the information that you receive from your sources, how you feel as we're going to fall? Will there be any, do you feel confident that your estimates will be closer, or is there still hope that the state may come through with additional funding, or where we are with that? Thank you.
Yeah, I haven't heard, thanks for the question. I haven't heard any chatter about going over what Governor Shapiro had put forth. In fact, the chatter that I have heard is, as I said, you'll see some of that, but not all of it. Now, that was a little while ago, but I certainly haven't heard anything about going over that number like we saw happen, what was it, 2 years ago or something like that. I do believe that taking a 50% piece of that is probably a pretty good, safe bet. I wouldn't recommend going too far with that number. And I'll speak from experience and say, because I have gone too far with that number before and got burned. So I'm not comfortable going really beyond that number. Again, my professional advice.
I have one additional question. So I looked at we're looking at that 5.3 index, and if we look at the last 10 years, the average index for spring forward, that the Act 1 index has been 2.67%, which obviously this year, when the indexes have gotten higher as the years have progressed, so we would expect not to be anywhere near 2.67. But the 10-year tax increase for spring forward is 6.37 if we remove it in the outliers. But anyway, following the trend of the last 10 years, with the 5.3 index, we could expect an increase of our taxes of 4.7 if we remove the outliers, because there was 1 year in which we did a 0% increase, and this past year we actually did a 4.1, which was high. It would be 4.3. So with that, that would be based on our 10-year trend for our tax increases, where it would be. Can you talk to me about, and the community, about what we're doing to try and get that? I know 5.3 is the Act 1 index, but with these increases that you've talked about, what we're doing to try and keep within that trend number that we've had experienced for the last 10 years.
Sure, and I think the real issue comes down to is, outside circumstances, things that are not in our control. And the big one that the averages over there that did not contemplate was that 17% in stacking inflation. Back in, the early part of the years you reference, inflation was less than 1%. So really, the increases were not necessarily happening on the, or at least the major part weren't really happening on the non-personnel related things. They were happening more on the personal related things based on agreements and, folks with raises and that type of stuff. But typically, if I recall correctly, and I'm just going off the top of my head, we've seen, it even in those times, we saw expense increases of around, I'm going to say somewhere between 3 and 4% each year, even though inflation was low. So I think then when you stack on that, the last few years of inflation, which is now impacting all our hard goods, I think that's a number that's really driving the number. And in all honesty, I don't think I can control that. I don't think we really have a good lever to control that piece.
So doesn't the 5 point, and thank you for that, and I don't disagree with you, but doesn't that 5.3% index, which is the highest that we've ever seen, take inflation into consideration based on, and I'm not sure everybody knows what that number is based on, so.
Yeah, it takes a number of things into consideration. Inflation is certainly one of them, but as you can see, if we were at, I forget what it was, 3.4 2 years ago, I think we were at 4.1 last year, and 5.3 this year, you can see there is an increase there. But you can also see that it's not increased at inflationary levels. We were talking about 6 to 7% 2 years ago because it's a trailing indicator is really why. It also takes into account across Pennsylvania what wages look like, which are now starting to catch up with the inflation that's taken place over the past few years. So a lot of things are being inflation driven in that respect. Thought just popped right out of my head. I hate when that happens. Getting old, right? Getting old. So I'm going to leave it at that.
Right. And thank you for that information. Again, I really do appreciate it. I do hope that.
I remember what it was. See that? You sparked it. And I don't know how because it's unrelated. But no, but one thing that I also know is, based on, again, this is a number that comes out in September timeframe, which is when the index number comes out in that fall, the fall window, right? They came out with a 5.3, right? We talked about that. They also estimated that the following year was going to be 4. And that was still when they thought they were going to have 5 rate reductions. I would bet dollars to donuts that number is going to go up again next year because inflationary levels, while they're better, it's still inflation on top of inflation on top of inflation. And that's a big piece of the driver.
Yeah, and before I defer over to Mr. Jackson, just to reiterate that, when we talk about the trend in the Act 1 index, right, that number is calculated every single year, right? It's not based on 10-year data of where we are from an economic standpoint, because if you look at 2010 to 2020, as you mentioned, we were in a bull market, we were in a near zero interest rate environment, very low inflationary environment, and then 2020 hit and we started to see that number creep up to where it is today. So it is very deliberate as to why, and as you mentioned, there's a lot of things in the market that are outside of our control that dictate what that number is, and that number is a cost of doing business. That's why the state sets it where it is, because if you look at what Springford has done, and we even can take last year, Springford was very much in line with a lot of the neighboring school districts, right? This is not a Springford issue. This is a systemic issue with regards to public education. Mr. Jackson?
I would just like to finish my one
Oh,
last
I'm
statement.
sorry, I didn't know that you were done. Go
That's
ahead.
okay. I just wanted to say that I appreciate the efforts put forward as we as a board certainly our number one reason that we're here is to look out for our students and their education, but also to be stewards of the taxpayers' money. And there are times perhaps that we need to tighten our belts and cut other things that we would like to have had in order to get the number to a place where in maybe a different year we would be able to do. So that's what I'm just, my feelings on it. But thank you very much for all your work.
There are a lot of action items on the agenda today. If there's something that one should feel free to vote no. Mr. Jackson, go ahead.
Since I've been on the board for over 8 years, I can speak to some of Dr. Wright's issues. I think in '09, this district had a deficit of $12.9 million, and those boards had to work within those parameters. It is almost impossible to do comparisons because what those boards might have addressed or did not address, we're having to address now. So it is easy to sit here and say, why aren't we doing what they did back then? Well, there's not a direct comparison item by item, cost by cost that you can do to say there's a trend. Further to that point, this budget is talked about in the finance meeting every month. It is talked about what has been spent for the month. We project what the projected increase will be. This here is just an accumulation of all of that data into this report. So as far as tightening the belt, as I mentioned last month and the month before, IT and curriculum, right now, I think there has been $2.5 million on the table. There's $1.3 million as part of that 2.5. So if you want to, as you guys like to say, cut, you don't cut because you're just kicking the can down the road. If you want to do a true analysis of this, you determine what you can do without. That is proper budget management. And with that, I will seal.
Thank you. And I also want to defer to Mr. Lackey and Mrs. Goldsmith online. I apologize. I should have probably deferred to Zoom first. But is there any commentary that you would like to make before we proceed?
No, I just want to thank Mr. Fink for all his work and the Finance Committee for, spending the time and the attention to detail to make this as palatable as possible.
Thank you.
I didn't have anything further, but again, I echo Dave's sentiments. I have had questions since my time on the board, and I've reached out to Mr. Fink, and he has been more than responsive and answered them, very timely, and I appreciated it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Fink. Appreciate it. Moving on to board and committee reports, we'll start with MCIU.
Thank you very much. The MCIU had its board meeting on March 27th. Dr. Donna McGaffney, the Director of Office of Organization and Professional Learning, introduced Program Administrator Stephanie Schwab, who presented an overview of the MCIU's new environmental mobile unit. Yes, you heard it. An innovative mobile outdoor classroom experience that blends environmental literacy with real-world sustainability practices. If you go to the website, you can get more information about it and how our students could potentially experience this opportunity. Montgomery County Intermediate Unit's Pre-K Counts program was pleased to accept an invitation to attend Governor Josh Shapiro and First Lady Lori Shapiro's second Easter egg hunt in Harrisburg. The IU is grateful for the invitation and the governor's support of our program. The MCIU board appointed Fox Rothschild as solicitor for the MCIU for the next year. There were several vendors agreements, consortium items that were dealt with. Then they also approved the semi-annual review of the MCIU Health and Safety Plan. Approved an agreement with Spring-Ford Area School District to host 2 intermediate unit classrooms for July 1st through June 30th of 2027. Approved, and the MCIU board approved a number of contracted service agreements to support its many trainings, programs, and services provided by the offices of the MCIU. Today, Monday, the MCIU celebrates Earth Day. Let's see, with the week of April 22nd, this week is Head Start Cultural Week, so they'll be celebrating that. On Wednesday, the MCIU board meeting, again, will be at 6:45. I'll be in attendance. This Friday, there is the legislative breakfast at the MCIU, which many of us will be attending here from Springford. The week of May 6th through the 10th, I want to remind us, is Teacher Appreciation Week. And Thursday, May 16th, is the Multilingual Learners Community Partner Fair Instructional Symposium. So I did share that information if we have anyone from Springford interested in attending. And also Monday, May 20th, is the MCIU Education Foundation's golf outing at Brookside Country Club in Pottstown. And a reminder that May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and the Office of Student Services has a number of events planned throughout the month. That is it. Any questions?
Okay, thank you very much. Mrs. Weingarten, Western Montgomery Career and Technology Center.
Thank you. The Western Montgomery Career and Technical Center, JOC, met on April 8th. Mr. Livingood provided a budget presentation to the JOC, and there were several scenarios presented, including maintenance for all of our programs with a slight increase in supply and materials, a consideration for $50,000 for safety and security, consideration for an addition of the assistant principal, as well as another consideration that included a number of these things all together. And we're still reviewing these scenarios and their budget. The discussion topics included a reference to the new grant received from Senator Pennychuck's office for $150,000, and that will be used for the automotive technology program. And the proposal is to use the funds by purchasing a smaller hybrid vehicle that can have 7 passengers, basically to get the students together for smaller trips, and it would eliminate the need to take their very old 10-passenger van. They'd also like to add cabinetry to the automotive tech program, and this would provide, and that would include a car as well, a cabinetry and a car, and that would provide students the opportunity to study on a car with the ADAS systems. And then the final discussion topic was the opportunity with Hunter Light Duty Training Center. And we're already a partner with the Heavy Duty Training Center, but they want to consider adding the light duty. And this relationship would allow us to become an ADAS training center, which would be one of only 12 in the country. And they've partnered with Toyota to bring the equipment to these vehicles, so they want to make sure they purchase this van from the Toyota line. So it's a win-win in terms of being able to use it, fix it, maintain it, and learn from it. This relationship with Hunter would provide us with a $338,507 in free equipment to train our students. And the really cool thing is, if you're not into automotive repairs, Hunter is known for the best tools in the business. So this is a pretty significant benefit to our campus and our students. We had a few reports. Mr. Livingood is meeting with UPS, or he may have already met with them since this report was done. And they may be donating some of their fleet to the diesel program, which is very cool. And if you spend a lot of time at these meetings, as many of us do, you'll see how many amazing relationships the administration has with outside sources like this. The climate survey for their faculty and students was out that week, and the results will be presented to us at May's board meeting. And on Thursday, April 11th, I want to say thank you to the Western Tech Center for inviting some of us to their co-op banquet, which was a spectacular Greek dinner. And as we've mentioned many times before, if you have the opportunity to go to any of the dinners at the Tech Center, it's phenomenal. And let's see. A big one is we had an update on the applications. The application process was closed. They were due mid-March, and they were expanded a little bit because there was a computer issue with Upper Perk. We received 386 applications in total. Now, keep in mind, there are only 250 seats available. The students accepted into the program should be getting letters around this time, mid to late April. So this was very interesting. They provided us with some numbers. The percentage of 8th grade student applications went up from 18% on average, right, across the 3 districts. This was the average, just to give you an idea. Upper Perk had 35% of their applicants were 8th grade, Pottsgrove 30%, and Springford 14%. So it was very, very interesting to see how some of those early introduction programs have been working, because I think, I might have the grade off, but I think they start introducing the concept of the tech school as early as 5th grade. So seeing those 8th grade numbers apply is pretty remarkable. Cosmetology, again, had the most applicants at 65. And we'll see those details at our next meeting as well. Now, keep in mind, the numbers are really impressive, and your instinct might be, hey, well, why are we turning away students? Can we just add more teachers or more classrooms? Well, not just yet. We're collecting data to understand if this is an anomaly in terms of trends, or if it's really a long-term trend that will inspire the investment in growth and classrooms and teachers. And seeing it, knowing that some of the data was not available until Mr. Livingood came around, it's pretty impressive to see how the calculations can be made going forward. And one more report. Do you want to do yours, or I'll just read through it?
Go for it.
All right. Mr. Rizzo met with Mr. Livingood to discuss strategic plans for future growth and the capital plan. They'll be meeting with the business managers and superintendents to figure out how to tackle that plan and what needs to be done within the Articles of Agreement. And as you can see, exciting things are always happening at the Western Montgomery Career and Technical Center. It's really phenomenal when you get to hear from the students. And when we went to the co-op dinner, we did get to sit with the students at dinner and hear what they were up to, and it was just really amazing. So our next JOC meeting is at 7 p.m. on May 6th. And that concludes my report. Any questions?
Thank you, Mrs. Weingarten.
If we're going to, I'd like to stay with the theme of tightening the belt. Regarding the cap reserve, what is a target number that we're looking for from the districts, or a target number that you're looking at for cap reserve? Is it $500,000, $1 million, 1.5? Any ballpark?
No. The short answer is no, there's no ballpark. We have been kind of coaching him up in that the purpose of a Western Center being allowed to have a cap reserve is really about how they want to use the funds and having a plan for how to use those so that we can plan for that. So until we know exactly what the scope of work is they want to do, we can't advise them or receive advice on what an appropriate cap reserve would be.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Rizzo. Any other questions? Okay, Mrs. Westwood.
In the spirit to make this a little more fun, I'll tighten the belt and go short on my report here for everybody. So the theme for the legislative meeting is very similar to what I've talked about in past meetings, and we met on April 3rd as a note at 7 p.m. The next meeting is May 7th at 6 p.m. Most of the meeting, we talked about cyber charter reform, which I've spoken at this audience and others about. We were joined by Larry Feinberg, who is the director of the Keystone Center for Charter Change, and he gave a presentation just a bit on the history of cyber charter, how there hasn't been reform in quite a number of years, and then we talked individually about some of the impacts district by district. I think I've shared in the past for Springford with what's in the bill right now for House Bill 1422, which Representative Cerisi has put forth and passed the House in the summer, but has been sitting for 8 months, it would save Springford an estimated $1.2 million a year, which is roughly 1% of our budget. When we talk about levers that we have at our disposal to decrease our taxes as taxpayers, that's a large one. We were encouraged, and I've encouraged folks in the past to please write to your state senators Also, which was recommended, Kim Ward, who's the president pro tempore, Joe Pittman, the majority leader, Scott Martin, the appropriations chair. This bill has been stuck for 8 months and has not moved. I was at Advocacy Day just 2 weeks ago on Eclipse Day and met with several state representatives and state senators and talked about this issue specifically. But if you feel passionate about it, please consider reaching out to them. The second thing that we talked about very briefly was the Advocacy Day. This is the first one that I went to. It was a great day to go up to Harrisburg and get to meet with legislators and meet with other people that are also very passionate about funding, and it wasn't just cyber charter. We talked about with some of the representative state senators, funding for basic education, infrastructure, special education, things that are very important not just to our district, but to many Pennsylvania school districts. That's the end of my report. Any questions?
Thank you, Mrs. Westwood. Mr. Lackey, American Legion.
Yep. Spring City American Legion baseball met on Thursday, March 28th. I was unable to attend due to a personal conflict. However, I did follow up with the board president, Walter Gadzicki, this past week. Nothing to report back to the board at this time. We meet again this Thursday, April 25th. That concludes my update.
Thank you, Mr. Lackey. Any questions or comments? And I did go over Mrs. Goldsmith. That was not intentional, Mrs. Goldsmith. So could you please give us a PSBA update?
Sure, that's okay. Just two short things. One, there was, as Ms. Westwood pointed out, an in-person advocacy day in April. PSBA is actually running a virtual advocacy day on May 13th if anybody wants more information. The second item is PSBA did send out an alert that, and I'm not trying to usurp Mr. Fitzgerald's announcement or news, but there were new Title IX regulations issued, and PSBA just wanted the constituent districts to be aware of that, the new regulations and any possible policy impacts that might occur.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll hear more about that as we get to the solicitor report. Any questions for Mrs. Goldsmith? Okay, Mr. Rizzo.
Thank you. A few announcements. First of all, Springford graduates have taken over television lately. Congratulations to Eric Ryman for his appearance on Jeopardy! Although he came in second on the show, he is always number one in the Ram family. On Sunday, Lieutenant Paul Johnson completed his 52-day, 3,000-mile trek from California to New York to raise mental health awareness. He averaged more than 2 marathons a day running through towns big and small, facing physical and mental challenges along the way. He is truly an inspiration to all of us. Congratulations, Lieutenant Johnson. 5K happened last week. So Springford hosted the 10th annual Springford Educational Foundation 5K Run Walk this past Friday on the 19th. This year welcomed more than 400 5K runners and nearly 60 one-mile kid fun runners. The 5K supports Springford's annual Impact Awards, which is held annually, which is an opportunity for seniors to nominate any Springford employee that had an impact on their lives. Decision Day is coming up. Educational Foundation also supports Decision Day, which is held on April 30th. Decision Day is open to all graduating seniors, along with their parents, to celebrate this important milestone, whether they are entering the workforce, serving our country, or attending a 2- or 4-year college. We look forward to celebrating the future decisions of all of our students. Very excited, first time making history indoor percussion. Congratulations to the Springford Area High School Indoor Percussion Ensemble on their WGI Percussion World Championship, winning first place, first time in school history. Congratulations to the staff. Congratulations to the staff and students for making their mark in the history books. We will be recognizing the team at a meeting in May. And lastly, retirees. We have a few that are on our list tonight. Nancy Birch, instructional assistant at Evans Elementary with 25 years of service. Barb Halpin, administrative assistant at Brook Elementary, 38 years of service. Tim Poth, data and reporting specialist at the 9th grade center, 3 years of service. Vanessa Pucco, administrative assistant, transportation department, 19 years of service. And Raylene Jeffers, food service manager at Brook Elementary, 33 years of service. Total years of service in Springford for those 5 employees, 118 years. We thank them for their commitment to our district. That's my report.
Thank you, Mr. Rizzo. And I'm about to speak not as Erica Herman's board president. Of course, congratulations to all of our retirees, but I would be very much remiss if I didn't say that as a Brooke parent for the last 9 years, I'm trying to count because my youngest is leaving this year, with Mrs. Halpin and Mrs. Jeffers. That is an end of an era. And, I've had a lot of great interactions with them, and I wish them well. All right, with that said, any other questions or comments? All right, so we are going to move on to the voting portion of our meeting, which we will start as always with section 4 minutes, letters A and B.
Are we on the solicitor's report?
Oh, I apologize. I was so excited to go into voting, and I was so moved by the retirees. We have, standing in for Mark Fitzgerald, we have one of his partners from Fox Rothschild, so my apologies.
Good evening. Thank you. I think you'll be very pleased with my report tonight. I conferred with Mr. Fitzgerald, and there is no formal solicitor's report to present. That having been said, just to touch upon Ms. Goldsmith's comments, there are new regulations as it relates to Title IX. They, however, do not go into effect until August 1st, so that I know that Mr. Fitzgerald and some of my other colleagues will be updating you accordingly.
Thank you very much. I'll just say that I was preempting it, and that was intentional.
No worries.
Before we move on, just one brief, go ahead. Sorry.
No, nothing further.
One brief correction. I apologize with retirees. I was moved as well. Nancy Birch, I do apologize. IA at the 5-6, not at Evans Elementary. Wanted to make that correction.
Thank you very much. And congratulations, Nancy. Okay. All right, let's get on to the voting portion of our meeting, starting with section 4, letters A and B. Do I have a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions and discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Mrs. Goldsmith?
Aye. I think I
Any
said at the same
opposed?
time as Dave.
The motion carries 9-0. And yes, Mr. Lackey and Mrs. Goldsmith, if I don't hear an audible yay or nay, I will call on you individually. Thank you. Section 5, personnel, letters A through T. Do I have, let me give you a moment to see if there's anything that you want to separate out. Okay, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second? Questions and discussion? All those in favor, yes, Mrs. Goldsmith, were you going to say something?
Nope, nope, not at all.
Was you hearing yourself?
Okay, no questions and discussion, so all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries 9-0. Moving on to finance, section 6, letters A through J. Okay, do I have a motion? A second?
Second.
Any questions and discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries 9-0. Moving on to section 7, property, letter A. Do I have a motion? A second?
Second.
Questions and discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Mrs. Goldsmith?
You asked all members to say aye. I'm opposing.
Thank you. So that motion carries 8-1.
Sorry.
I apologize.
I oppose also.
So that motion carries 7-2. Okay. Moving on to section 8, programming and curriculum, letters A through N.
Separate L and M.
L and M as in Mary.
M as in Mary.
Any others? Okay, so we're going to be looking at Section 8, letters A through N, without letter L and M as in Mary. Do I have a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Questions and discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Mrs. Goldsmith?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries 9-0. Moving on to Section 8, letters L. Excuse me? Thank you. Moving on to Section 8, letters L. We'll take them one by one. Do I have a motion? A second?
Second.
Is there questions and discussion?
I want to stay with the theme of tightening the belt. My question is, can the district do without spending $100,000, $500,000 over a 5-year term on this particular item?
Who would like to take that? Dr. Wright?
Right, so as was discussed or mentioned in the board memo, that this is the Microsoft Office products and everything that we need as part of, I think backbone was the word that was used, of our systems. There are computers. The number is negotiated actually through the consortium with the Lancaster Lebanon Intermediate Unit. So the best of my knowledge, we cannot do without this, and we cannot obtain it for a lesser cost. Is there anything that any of the other administrators would like to chime in about it?
Okay. Mr. Jackson, any other questions?
Nope.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you very much. Any other questions from the board? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
No.
And I don't know why I'm having trouble hearing Mrs. Goldsmith. I hear Mr. Lackey quite clearly. Mrs. Goldsmith, what's your vote?
Yeah, my vote was aye.
Okay, so that motion carries 8-1. Moving on to letter M, do I have a motion? Okay, program curriculum letter M, do I have a motion? So moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, questions and discussion?
So I'll stay with the theme of tightening the belt. This is $1 million item that we're looking to do a refresh. And yes, I understand it's budgeted, but everything's budgeted. So my question again is, can the administration do without this $1 million purchase right now?
So as you mentioned, Mr. Jackson, this is part of the 12-year plan. This is to replace staff devices on a 4-year rotation. My concern is if we do skip that year, then we would potentially be kicking the can down the road, and we know that when we kick the can down the road, it just gets heavier. So that would be my concern with not moving forward with this motion.
And I can appreciate that, but I'm not saying doing it next year. I'm saying doing it much further down the year from a budgetary perspective, since the concern of this board is to tighten the belt. Right here, we're talking almost $1.1 million between items L and M. So that's just my question. Looking at it as the finance chair, you know, that's part of my charge to look at it. And when there's a concern regarding the budget that Mr. Fink presented tonight, which is part of the end game that we do every month with detail, and I hear that we need to tighten our belts, there's a $1.1 million tightening belt opportunity right now. So that's my concern. Thank you.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, Mrs. Wesson, go ahead.
I don't disagree with the spirit of your comment, Mr. Jackson. I personally would like, and I think the Finance Committee is an appropriate place for us to look holistically at our budget. And I'm not saying this isn't the right place, to be clear, but to look holistically at the budget and see where there are places where that can be done without hindering student outcomes, because that's the most, to me personally, that's the most important thing. So I'm not going to say if the device piece for the teachers is the most important thing, but I think that would be a valuable exercise. Now that we have a lot of these larger costs, like the CBA, the meet and discuss, and these bigger things that we didn't know were going to cost that have come into focus, I think this is the time for us to do that.
And Ms. Westwood, I agree with you, but again, the board sits here and votes on the CBA. They vote on the meet and greet, and all of that is part of the overall budget. But then to sit here and question the budget of what you already approved is mind-boggling. And it's like we go through this exercise of, I won't use the word I really want to use, every year, and I just don't understand why.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. I will just say, as always, everyone is absolutely entitled to vote the way that they would like to, and regardless of how one votes, everyone at this table knows that you support the will of the vote and the will of the board, and it is what it is, so.
Could I add to that, just with regards to our 12-year plan? This is based on a commitment that the district made for a one-to-one. If the board wants to revisit any of that, reassess that 12-year plan, things like that, that is certainly something that we could do, but it would be basically changing some of our philosophy, and we could look at that. So I'm not opposed to a bigger dive into that, but that is not something we can do, flip a switch right at this moment to do.
Thank you. And Mr. Catalano did forward the 12-year plan to everybody, so, we'll take a look at it, and we can reconvene a curriculum next month. Okay? So any other questions and discussion? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
No.
I did not catch Mr. Lackey or Mrs. Goldsmith.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion carries 8-1. Okay. Moving on to conferences and workshops, letters A and B. Do I have a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions and discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, that motion carries 9-0. Moving on to Section 10, Other Business, letters A and B. Do I have a motion? Is there a second?
Second.
Questions and discussion? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries 9-0. And then Section 11 is simply an informational item. With regards to Brook Elementary Home and School Association to install a seating area consisting of tables and chairs within the Butterfly Garden section. This is an Eagle Scout project provided by Troop 231. Will Garman is the Eagle Scout candidate providing the installation labor for the project. So we want to thank Will and his partnership with the Brook Home and School Association for this in terms of the beautification. Okay. Thank you. And now we will move on to board comment. I'd like to defer to, let's see if Mr. Lackey and Mrs. Goldsmith, do you have any comment to make tonight?
No comment.
No comment.
I'd like to defer to the people at the table. Is there any comment that anyone would like to make tonight?
I have one, maybe two, maybe three. I'd like to start with, I had the pleasure of attending a special meeting with the Upper Providence supervisors, a public meeting regarding Park House. And I followed this for a while, and so as part of the facilities group, along with Mr. Rizzo and Ms. Hermans. And I just want to keep this on our radar because, so I'll give a little context here. This is a development that has been talked about since I was on the zoning and hearing board with the Upper Providence Township many years ago. And now this has really come down, Region 1, to either build in 603 units or 1,203 units. And it was, I think, like a 3.5, 4-hour meeting. And right now, it was in the paper today, the Board of Supervisors has given a vote to look at the alternative, which is the 603 units. And no matter how you look at it or what occurs here, there will be an impact to the district. The question is how much. And even though part of this is a 55 and over development, If you're in tune with what works in the district, there was a property over by Mind Development, the Enclave at Ridgewood, that started out as 55 and over, and they could not sell the units, and it was rezoned, and now the bus there's a full bus now that picks up from that development, and I think there's 100+ units in that development of kids we never planned on. So I say that to say this. Follow this. Please try and stay close to this. It will impact the district in some form or fashion. And because you hear 55 and over doesn't mean that's going to be the end game. So I just wanted to share that with the board. It was also in our best paper this morning, the Limerick News. So that's one item. Second item, I'll leave it at that. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jackson, for the update on Upper Providence Township. Any other comments or questions from the board? Okay, so I will end with two. The first I want to say is, any successful school district runs on the hearts and the backbone of our staff and our teachers. And I simply want to say that, as we all know, we voted on the CBA tonight, and I want to thank a lot of people that were involved in that process. Negotiations were highly collaborative, highly productive, and I want to first start out by thanking our SFEA leadership team, our negotiating team in the room today, led by Mr. Laurie, Mrs. Kelly German, Jackie Ritter, for your efforts over the last 6 months. And I would be remiss if I did not mention our district administrators, Mr. Fink and Mrs. Lease, for your efforts in working very collaboratively with the Personnel Committee and the board overall, keeping us updated over the last 6 months. So, I'm not surprised that we were able to reach a mutually beneficial outcome as quickly as we did when we have great people at the table. So, thank you very much. With that said, the other thing I want to make mention of is I know that last week I had made a comment around the Brook Playground, and part of the discussions that we've had over the last month is, do we need to be a bit more forward-thinking with making sure that our playgrounds are accessible and can support children with various needs, various special needs. And so, we ended that conversation last week making a statement that Mr. Pellegrin would be partnering with Dr. G to assess the state of our playgrounds and really create a long-term plan to budget for and plan for, that down the road. In the meantime, I did get an email from a community member, Mrs. Deerdorf, and I did get an email from a community member who, as a result of that conversation, wanted to share some feedback. This community member is a parent in the district who is confined to a wheelchair, and part of her feedback was with regards to the 9th grade fields. And so having a middle schooler who plays spring and fall sports on the 9th grade fields, she shared with us how difficult and challenging it is to be able to spectate and to be able to observe her daughter's games. And, she was very open to say that her concern is really less about her, though, and more about students with needs who might have physical needs where they would not be able to fully participate. And so we had a good email conversation. And as a result, I did forward that. I just want to let the board know that I did forward her email to Mr. Rizzo, who then did get in touch with Mr. Pellegrin to do some investigation of the situation. So, I just wanted to acknowledge that, while we were talking very micro in terms of looking at our playgrounds, I do think that this, and again, I speak as one board director, should be a priority for the district in terms of making sure that all of our fields are accessible to those that have special needs, variety of special needs, and making sure that they feel supported and included in whatever events are going on in the district. So, Mr. Rizzo, Mr. Pellegrin, I know that you've already started looking into this, and so I think that this parent, what I really appreciate about what she wrote in is that she did offer some short-term solutions, which to me, is maybe a way of securing some short-term wins. We'll see what the district thinks about it as part of your analysis. But, that's the short-term solutions that I think were proposed is really not the long-term answer, right? The long-term answer is how do we ensure that we can strategically plan for and budget for making the improvements necessary to make sure that the district is being inclusive from a facility standpoint. So that takes time, right? Anytime you're going to make a systemic change to whatever it is, facilities, to policy, to the climate in the district, it takes time, it takes planning, it takes multiple stakeholders, it takes input. So with that said, though, I am hopeful that we can talk about this sooner rather than later in an upcoming property meeting. So,
We welcome all good discussions in property.
thank you, Mr. Jackson. All right, and that's all I have. Okay. So with that said, we'll move on to public to be heard. This does not have to be with regards to agenda items, so if there is anyone that wishes to speak, please approach the podium with your name and township of residence.
My name is Marcus Plummer. I live in Phoenixville in Region 1. I've been bullied a lot, and it has gotten to the point where it's just too much. You guys seem to address these issues as specific incidents instead of looking at it as a bigger problem. You all have the power to do something about the numerous amounts of students who have been bullied and harassed and give them justice. But you have been too easy on the bullies. New policies need to be made. You have the power to stop making school torture for me and many students who are going through similar things to me. But you are not helping as you should. You say it will be hard for us to make changes, but remember, you have the power to do it. Use it correctly, or the well-being of your students are at risk.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Is there anyone else in the room that wishes to speak?
Hi, my name is Zach Laurie, and I'm a resident of Limerick, PA, but I'm here in my capacity as Vice President of SFEA. I actually wanted to echo the comments that you just made a bit ago, Mrs. Hermans, about the really productive working together climate that we had with the bargaining team of Mrs. Lease and Mr. Fink. It really was productive. They do drive a hard bargain, so do we. But I feel like what we worked out really is in the best interest of the district. It's a great way to attract new teachers, make Spring-Ford a place that graduates or people coming from other districts want to come and work in, but also retaining the great staff that we already have. So I'm excited that you voted yes today. We have a 5-year contract, so stability, and we know what's gonna be in our future for the next 5 years. So thank you to Mrs. Lease and Mr. Fink, and also the board for trusting them to bargain with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Laurie. Is there anyone else in the room that would like to make public comment? Okay, thank you. Mr. Rizzo?
Sure. Just very briefly, not to take anything away from the agreement between this district and the association, but Marcus, well done, young man. Well done. It takes a lot of courage to get up there and stand up for yourself, and I appreciate what you did. We, as a district, certainly want to like to keep working with your family and working with you at the school to help support you, but well done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rizzo. Okay. With that said, do I have a motion to adjourn? So moved. Thank you.